The whole care home went silent the moment that strange thumping sound echoed down the hallway. No one knew what was coming around the corner. But one thing was clear: whatever it was too big, too heavy, and way too bold to belong inside a place meant for calm mornings and quiet afternoons. It all began on a slow, peaceful afternoon when the staff thought nothing unusual could possibly happen. The care home was the kind of place where every sound had a rhythm: soft chatter from the game room, the distant hum of the TV, and the gentle squeak of wheelchairs rolling over polished floors. But that day, something felt different, though no one could explain why. The nurses moved around with their usual smiles, but there was a small tension in the air, like the calm before a storm. Maybe it started with Mr. Tobias sitting alone near the window, staring out at the empty lawn with the kind of look that carried years of stories no one had time to hear. He was known for his quiet nature, but lately he had become quieter than usual, speaking only in short lines and keeping to himself more than before. Everyone assumed he was just tired, but the truth was deeper, resting heavy inside his heart. Mr. Tobias had lived most of his life on a wide-open farm filled with the warmth of dawn and the smell of fresh hay. His hands had held reins more times than they had held pens, and his closest companion had not been a person, but a tall, gentle horse named Magnolia. That horse had been with him through storms, long nights, and lonely seasons. Losing the farm, moving into the care home, and leaving Magnolia behind had been the hardest decision he ever made. The staff often found him touching the old photo he kept in his pocket, brushing his trembling thumb across the faded image of his beloved horse. It was the one thing that made his eyes soften. But lately, even that picture wasn't enough. The distance between him and the life he once knew felt too wide to cross. His grandson noticed this change more than anyone. He visited whenever work allowed, always trying to spark a smile or pull him into a story from the old days. But every time he asked, "How are you feeling, Grandpa?" Mr. Tobias would force a small smile and say he was fine. It wasn't the truth, and the grandson knew it. One day, he overheard his grandfather whisper something under his breath, a sentence so soft it almost slipped away. "If only I could see Magnolia again." Just once, those words stayed with him, weighing heavily in his mind long after the visit ended. On his way home, he couldn't shake the thought. He kept replaying his grandfather's voice, weak but full of longing. It was then, in a moment of bold, wild determination, that he thought of an idea so impossible, so ridiculous, and so unbelievably risky that even he laughed at himself at first. But the idea didn't go away. Instead, it grew, filling his mind until it became a plan, an outrageous plan that made no sense, yet somehow felt like the only thing that could bring light back to Mr. Tobias's fading spirit. He knew the care home would never allow a horse inside. Not in a million years. The rules were strict, and the staff didn't like surprises. But when a heart is desperate enough, rules start to look flexible. So he started planning, sketching little maps on scraps of paper, writing down staff shifts, noting quiet hours, and imagining a way to pull off the craziest act of love he could think of. Sneaking a horse, an actual, full-sized horse, into a care home. He wasn't thinking about the chaos. He wasn't thinking about the trouble. He was thinking about one thing only: the look on his grandfather's face when Magnolia walked into his room. And once that image took hold of his imagination, there was no turning back. The plan had already begun. The plan sounded simple in his head. But once he sat down to figure out the details, it became clear that sneaking a horse anywhere, let alone into a care home, was the kind of idea people usually abandon after 1 minute of thinking. But he didn't abandon it. Instead, he leaned closer to the absurdity of it, because the only thing stronger than the size of the problem was the size of his grandfather's sadness. So he kept going. He spent the next few days quietly observing the care home like a detective working undercover. He noticed things no one else paid attention to: how the evening staff walked slower after dinner, how the night shift always gathered near the front desk talking about their kids, how the security guard Louis took his break at the exact same time every night and always got distracted by videos on his phone. Every small detail became a piece of the plan. He even timed how long it took for the automatic doors to close, how long the hallway lights stayed dim before switching to full brightness, and how often the nurses checked rooms. Some people would call that obsessive. He called it preparation. At home, he made a messy notebook filled with arrows, notes, and doodles that looked like a strange mix of a treasure map and a kid's drawing. At the center of the plan was Magnolia the horse, who had no idea she was about to be part of something unbelievable. He visited the farm where she stayed now, and the moment Magnolia recognized him, she leaned her warm head on his shoulder as if she still remembered Mr. Tobias too. That moment made the plan feel real. It was no longer a wild dream. It was happening. He just had to figure out how to get Magnolia inside without anyone calling the police or losing their jobs. Then came the funniest part of his entire mission, the disguise. He needed Magnolia to look less like a horse and more like something normal enough to pass through the doors without setting off a storm. He tried blankets, bed sheets, even a giant jacket from a thrift store, but nothing looked convincing. A horse is a horse. No blanket in the world can change that. But then he had an idea so ridiculous that it actually made sense. If she couldn't look like something else, she could at least look like something less suspicious. So he bought the biggest, fluffiest, most oversized dog coat he could find. Was Magnolia too big to be a dog? Absolutely. Was anyone expecting a horse disguised as a dog? Absolutely not. And sometimes surprise is the best trick of all. The night he chose for the mission was cloudy, quiet, and perfect for chaos. He arrived early at the farm and gently led Magnolia out of her stable. She walked calmly beside him, her hooves thudding softly on the ground, unaware of the adventure ahead. He placed the giant dog coat over her back, adjusting it until it sat neatly, though it still looked like a blanket on a moving mountain. But he kept going. He whispered encouragement to her, telling her she was the best dog in the world, and Magnolia simply blinked at him. Probably wondering why humans were so strange, the walk to the care home was slow but steady. Every step felt like a drum of nervousness beating inside his chest, but he kept reminding himself why he was doing this. He pictured Mr. Tobias's face, tired but hopeful, holding onto memories he feared he would never see again. That image pushed him forward. When he reached the care home parking lot, he took a deep breath and looked around. The place was quiet. A few lights glowed in the windows. He could hear the faint sound of a TV show playing somewhere inside. This was his moment. He straightened the coat on Magnolia, held her reins tightly, and whispered, "Okay, girl. Time to be sneaky." As they approached the entrance, his heart pounded so loudly he felt sure someone would hear it. But the doors opened like any normal night, and Magnolia stepped into the bright lobby with the confidence of a creature who didn't know she was breaking every rule in the building. For a second, everything was calm. Then Louis, the security guard, looked up from his phone. His eyes widened slightly, but instead of standing up or asking questions, he squinted and muttered, "Whoa. That's a big dog," before going right back to scrolling. The grandson stared in disbelief. It worked. It actually worked. Magnolia was inside. And now there was no turning back. The moment Magnolia's hooves touched the care home's polished hallway floor, the world around them seemed to shift. The usual calm air felt tighter, thicker, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. The grandson kept one hand on Magnolia's reins and the other pressed against his chest, trying to steady the speed of his heartbeat. Everything depended on staying quiet enough to slip past rooms filled with light sleepers, sensitive ears, and staff members who had no idea they were seconds away from witnessing the strangest night of their careers. Magnolia, however, had her own plans. She walked with slow, proud steps, her ears flicking forward and back, curious about every sound and every shadow. The hallway lights reflected off her coat, making her look even larger than she was, almost unreal. The grandson leaned in close and whispered, "Please, just be normal. Be a regular dog." A very big, very strange dog, But Magnolia, being a horse with no interest in acting like anything else, let out a soft huff of breath that echoed like a drum. He froze. A nurse down the hall paused mid-step, glancing around. He gently pulled Magnolia behind a corner, holding his breath until the nurse moved on, mumbling something about the vents making weird noises again. When she disappeared, he exhaled in shaky relief. It was a reminder. One wrong sound, one wrong step, and the entire mission would fall apart. They continued deeper into the hallway, trying to blend into the silence. Magnolia's hooves clicked lightly, but even that small sound felt dangerously loud. Every door they passed seemed like a doorway to disaster. Behind one, someone coughed. Behind another, a television murmured softly. Somewhere, a resident snored with the strength of a distant foghorn. Any of them could open their door at the wrong moment and find a horse disguised as a dog wandering freely through a building meant for slow walkers and quiet nights. But Magnolia kept moving with surprising patience, as if she understood the seriousness of this strange journey. Halfway to Mr. Tobias's room, everything took a sudden turn. Magnolia spotted something terrifying, not a person, not an alarm, not a camera. No, she saw a potted plant, a tall one, with big leaves. And for reasons known only to horses, Magnolia decided the plant was a threat. She stretched her neck toward it, sniffing it suspiciously. The grandson tugged gently, trying to pull her away, whispering, "Not now, please, not the plant." But Magnolia did exactly what he feared. She nudged it. The entire plant wobbled, swayed, and then toppled over with a crash loud enough to wake someone in the next building. Panic shot through him. He quickly grabbed the pot, trying to lift it back upright. But the soil had spilled everywhere, scattering across the hallway tiles like dark confetti. Magnolia snorted proudly, as if she had defeated an enemy. The grandson shook his head in despair, whispering, "You didn't need to win a fight with a plant." Footsteps approached from the other end of the corridor. He had seconds, maybe less. He tucked Magnolia into the nearest supply closet, squeezing inside and pulling the door almost shut. The closet was too small for both of them. His face pressed against a shelf, Magnolia's side pressed against him. And the smell of cleaning supplies filled his nose until he felt dizzy. A staff member appeared, saw the fallen plant, and sighed deeply. "Who keeps bumping into these things?" she muttered while scooping soil back into the pot. She looked around, shrugged, and walked away. The grandson waited until her footsteps faded before slowly pushing open the closet door. Magnolia stepped out like nothing had happened, blinking proudly as if she had just saved the building from danger. He wiped sweat from his forehead and whispered, "No more plants." "Deal." Magnolia flicked her tail in a way that did not feel like a promise. Still, they moved on, inching closer to the room they needed to reach. Every second felt longer than the one before. The hallway seemed endless, stretching like a maze created just to test how much stress one person could take. And yet, he kept going because quitting now wasn't an option. He had carried Magnolia this far. He could carry her the rest of the way well. Not literally, because no human could lift a horse. But his determination was strong enough to feel like he could when they finally reached the right hallway, the quietest one. The one closest to Mr. Tobias's room. He stopped for a breath. This was the final stretch, the most important part of the entire plan. Only a few more steps stood between Mr. Tobias and the moment he had dreamed of. But the grandson knew something else too. The closer they got, the greater the chance of being discovered. Magnolia sensed the tension. She lowered her head, her ears tilting forward. And for the first time since entering, she moved with the softness of a creature who understood she was not meant to be here, and with that, they began the last quiet walk toward the door that would change everything. The closer they moved toward Mr. Tobias's room, the heavier the air became. It felt as though the entire care home had fallen into a strange stillness, waiting for something to happen. The grandson tightened his grip on Magnolia's reins, feeling his palm grow warm with nervous sweat. Just a few more steps. Just a few more breaths. He repeated that in his head like a quiet chant. Magnolia walked beside him with a calmness that almost felt unreal, her earlier mischief vanishing as if she somehow sensed that this moment mattered more than any plant or shadow she had seen on the way. Her hooves touched the floor softly now, almost gentle, as though she was trying her best not to ruin the mission she had already nearly destroyed twice. When they reached Mr. Tobias's door, the grandson paused. His heart thumped so loudly it felt like someone might hear it through the walls. He stared at the small sign on the door with his grandfather's name on it. That simple sign held years of memories, stories of hard work, laughter on summer mornings, the smell of warm hay, the steady rhythm of Magnolia steps on the farm. And now, in this quiet hallway far from those open fields, he was about to bring a piece of that past back into his grandfather's present. He slowly pushed the door open with his free hand, letting it swing inward just enough for him and Magnolia to slip through. Inside the room, the lights were dim, casting soft shadows across the neat arrangement of furniture. Mr. Tobias lay in bed with his eyes half closed, drifting somewhere between sleep and silent thought. The grandson stepped inside first, motioning Magnolia to follow. She hesitated at the doorway for a second, gently sniffing the air. Then she stepped forward, her tall frame filling the room with a presence so warm and peaceful that it felt like the past had suddenly walked in. Mr. Tobias's eyes fluttered open at the sound of Magnolia's quiet breath. For a moment, he blinked slowly, unsure if what he saw was real or just a dream born from longing. But the second Magnolia stretched her neck toward him, he gasped a soft, trembling sound that carried more emotion than any words he had spoken in months. His hand reached out on instinct, shaky but determined, and Magnolia lowered her head so he could touch her muzzle. The moment his fingers brushed her soft coat, the weight he had been carrying since leaving the farm seemed to melt from his face. Tears filled his eyes, sliding slowly down his cheeks. His voice broke as he whispered her name, Magnolia, my girl. It was a voice filled with memories, sunsets shared, storms survived, and countless mornings when she had been the first sight he saw as he stepped out of his old farmhouse. Magnolia let out a warm breath across his hand, as if greeting an old friend she had missed for far too long. It was a moment wrapped in silence, but that silence was as powerful as any speech. It held everything they had lost and everything they still held onto. The grandson stood near the door, watching with a lump in his throat. Seeing them together again reminded him why he had risked everything, why he had spent days planning, worrying, and sneaking around hallways like a thief. It wasn't for excitement or rebellion. It was for this tiny spark of joy lighting up his grandfather's tired face. It was for this single moment where the world felt right again. But that moment of peace soon began to crack as a faint noise came from the hallway. A rolling cart. Footsteps, voices. The grandson's heart sank. Someone was coming. Magnolia lifted her head slightly, sensing the tension. Mr. Tobias looked at his grandson with a mix of gratitude and worrying, whispering, "They can't see her here." The grandson nodded. They both knew that if any staff member found a full-grown horse in the room, the consequences would be immediate and severe. He gently tugged on Magnolia's reins, trying to guide her toward the door quietly. But Magnolia wasn't ready to leave. She stayed close to Mr. Tobias, pressing her head beside his in a soft nuzzle. He stroked her one more time, whispering, "Thank you. Thank you for coming back to see me." Magnolia made a gentle sound deep in her throat, a soft noise that felt like an answer. Then, reluctantly, she allowed herself to be guided away. But just as they reached the doorway, the footsteps grew louder to loud. Someone was about to turn the corner. Panic rushed through the grandson. He glanced around the room and spotted a curtain beside the window, a thick, heavy one. With barely a second to think, he pulled Magnolia behind it, hoping it would hide her massive frame long enough for the danger to pass. The curtain bulged awkwardly, looking suspicious to anyone paying attention. But at that moment, it was his only hope. The door opened slightly, and a nurse peeked inside. "Mr. Tobias, everything okay?" she asked. He cleared his throat and nodded quickly. "Yes, yes." Just resting, she scanned the room for a moment, her eyes lingering near the window, as if sensing something out of place. The grandson held his breath so tightly his lungs ached. Magnolia stayed unbelievably still, her warm breath brushing the back of his neck. After a few tense seconds, the nurse gave a polite smile. "All right, just checking in." She closed the door gently. Silence fell again. The grandson slowly stepped out from behind the curtain, leading Magnolia into the hallway once more. They had almost been caught, but the mission wasn't over yet. They still had to get out, and escaping was about to be even harder than getting in.